Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. Chad Hyams here, sitting across the desk from my friend Bob Stewart. Bob, how are you today?
Do you really want to know? I just took the cap off of a king-size Sharpie, and I'm like high on Sharpie fumes over here. Like, oh my gosh.
This is going to be an awesome episode. And before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind you to take a moment and check out all the episodes and all of the different podcasts we have in the Win, Make, Give world. That's right. We've got season 1 and season 2. That's over 200 episodes already on Win, Make, Give. We've got the 15-point plan where Jolene and I get to talk to you about energy, health, and happiness levels. We've got Built How for our realtor audience out there looking to build their real estate business just how someone else has at a high level. And we have your friend and mine, Clint Swindoll, with Tell Me Something Good. That's right. Each week, Clint is bringing you a ray of sunshine, bringing you happiness and lessons to learn how to keep the right mindset during challenges. We've got so many great podcasts out there, Bob. If I put you on a spot right now, what's one of your favorite episodes that you remember listening to from any of the Win, Make, Give podcast network podcasts?
Man, the Well series for me is just the stalwart.
Sure.
I think of everything that we've done so far. It's had hundreds of thousands of listens, lots. I mean, and the impact I think it's had is, look, I'm sure there's other episodes that, speak to people individually.
All right, give me your favorite interview. I'm going to put you on the spot for.
My favorite interview was with the Navy,
our Blue Angel pilot.
Blue Angel, yeah. Johnny.
Yep.
Johnny Hiltz.
Yeah, that was a great one. He brought some great stuff.
Honestly, maybe that was my favorite because he was in here, right? He was like sitting in the chair with us. He came in. He was in his flight gear, and a cool story of. I mean, he's got a cool story.
Yeah, I think Chris Nikic might be one of my favorites.
Wow.
I mean, wow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of head and shoulders. I remember Dr. Phyllis Quinlan. That one really got you going when we had the pleasure. We've talked with so many great people, and we challenge you to go back and listen to some of the fantastic
That Chris
interviews.
Nikic interview is super powerful.
Yeah.
If I could change my answer, I'd change it to that.
Well, you can't. It's too late.
Okay.
It's out there. Bob, we're here in season 3. Now, what are we focusing on for season 3? We're focusing on
making a difference,
Yep.
making an impact, and then maybe making some more money.
Yeah. And what we are doing is, Bob, we're going to be looking at people. We're going to be looking at companies for making a difference, people who have done that, making an impact, people who have done that. We know that Ben really wants to focus on that third part of it, that make more money. Why do you think Ben really wants to dive into that so much, other than he's completely obsessed with the topic?
I think that he believes that we can use money in a good way.
Yep.
Right.
Sure.
And we can use it as leverage to help make more of a difference, help make more of an impact.
Yep.
In our communities, with our, the people that we lead. So I think for him, it's kind of this foundational thing that gives us a lot of opportunity to make, more of a difference, more of an impact.
I think you're absolutely right. He wants us all to be able to have that opportunity. Doesn't mean you have to make more money. He just wants us to have the opportunity to understand it, teach our children, that next generation, have those conversations.
I mean, in some cases, it's even just getting comfortable with the idea that it's okay to want to make more money.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's a lot of stigma, especially around the way some of us were raised, about, the idea that money is evil and it's the root of all evil and these different things. And I think that Ben wants to open our eyes to the fact that we can actually do good with money, and it can be a positive force.
Yeah. How many people were just taught, you're right, that we don't have a lot of money, so this is how so not necessarily they're bad people because they had lots of money, but we don't, so you don't need lots of money, so you shouldn't have lots of money. Yet you're right. How many lives has Ben impacted just on his own because he's been able to share, give, and do good with that money? So, Bob, I sat down. I did a lot of homework on this episode. I'm putting you on the spot. So, audience, just so you know, sometimes we come in with a topic and we all say, let's do this. Sometimes Ben just has the conversation and Bob and I are chasing along to keep up. Sometimes we're Googling literally during an episode because we know he's going to ask a question and we're like, I don't know what to even think about that. I went down a path, Bob, that's going to take us on a very interesting journey today. Okay. I figured if we're going to learn about money so much, we should understand how money works. I started doing a history of money, and I think we'll talk about that here for a little bit. And then before I knew it, I was learning things I did not know about how banks and the governments talk about money and use money. So, folks, this might not be one of our most, wow, that's funny, wow, Ben's rapping, wow, they're doing whatever. But this is going to be one of those episodes that's going to go a lot of different places, and we hope teach you a lot of different things.
Yeah, we just want to get a better understanding of money, right? Chad, it's such an interesting time, and I don't know, we record these and they drop sometimes days and sometimes weeks later, but we're in this interesting environment where interest rates are raising.
Yep.
There's all this talk about the supply of money. There was all of the stimulus money that came out, and what was the impact? We're seeing the impact of that money from 2 years ago and a year ago that was given to families around the United States. We're seeing the impact of that injection of money into the money system, as it were, into the banking system. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to learn a few things about that are really applicable to today's headlines, I think, that we're seeing in the news.
All right, and we got to start with a history. So let's go back, and I went to look up the history of money, and money actually comes before history is being documented. So there's actually guesses because money came before written history. That's how old.
Before like language.
Yeah, before they were truly documenting and all this stuff. Here's what we know. Before money existed, people lived on the barter system. So, Bob, you understand what the barter system is, right?
My wife jokes because I was born and raised in a really small town, Ashford, Washington, and we did barter still. My parents owned a grocery store, and people would come in, and my wife jokes, people would bring you guys chicken eggs so that you could get a gallon of milk, but seriously. So yes, I'm familiar with the barter system.
So you're very familiar with that, right?
Yeah. In small rural towns in America, that's still a thing, right? Like okay. You've got an excess of tomatoes that you grew, and somebody else is over there, doing woodwork, and you want some of their chairs, and so you give them your excess tomatoes, and they give you a chair, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it happens around your house. You probably are experiencing it with your boys too, where you're bartering with them saying, I will give you this cookie after you have cleaned that up or whatever. Yeah. It's not just for items. Sometimes it's also for services that are in there bartering. So that's where it started. And then after a while, what happened was money was created. And Aristotle, we've all heard of this guy, right? Aristotle's opinion on the creation of money was that when inhabitants of one country became more dependent on those of another, and they imported what they needed and exported what they had too much of, money necessarily came into use. So it ended up being a bartering system on such a huge scale, and sometimes on a delayed reaction. Like, I need this, and then I will give you that when the crops grow or the animals breed or whatever it is.
Essentially become, like in my head, it become a store of value,
yes.
Right? Like I can't, because if I was, let's say I was bartering and you had a cow and I wanted your cow, but all I had to give you was, a couple of goats, right? And you're like, well, you only got 2 goats, but a cow's worth 5 goats, right? Well, we'd have to figure out some way to split that difference. Like, okay, I owe you now, right? I owe you 3 goats. And what does that look like? Like, money came out of that idea of like, there's value here that has yet to be traded.
So it's interesting that you say that, Bob, because originally it was barley was specifically the item that they counted money towards, was the weight of the barley. So you owed me 10 pounds of barley. That ended up being worth this coin.
Got it.
And that was how you took your barley into the local area, and they gave you a coin based on the weight of your barley that you could then use to
and
go trade
those
off
original
elsewhere.
Coins were gold and silver. The original first coins that they can kind of trace back to. We don't know if this is the very first coins, but
right. Do you know what the first form of currency was?
Okay, so I cheated.
Yeah, you did.
I did cheat. It was the shekel.
That's right.
And I think it was actually like the Mesopotamian shekel.
Very
I think
good,
is the
Bob.
First, like as far back as they've gone, about 5,000 years back.
Yep.
For the Mesopotamian shekel that they believe was minted of either gold or silver, which was something that people found value in. So I'd come in, right? I'd say, well, I need to get 5 shekels, right? And so I'd give them, I guess, X amount of barley.
Whatever it was worth.
Right,
Yep.
which was, again, something of value, right? A store of value, because I could give that barley to you and you could eat it.
Yep.
Right? So then I'd give you so much barley to go get my 5 coins, right? That I could then turn around and go take to you and say, okay, Chad, I got 2 goats and 5 coins now. Is that worth your cow? And you'd probably do some calculations and go, yeah, okay, sure. Because you could take those 5 coins back later and buy
get
the barley.
Correct. That's
Right?
exactly what it was.
And it's funny because we lived on a standard like that in the U.S. until the 30s, I think, when we came off the gold standard. But all of our dollars were tied to gold back then, right? And you could go in and literally take your dollar bill in and get the equivalent amount of a little piece of gold.
Isn't it interesting that you say that? It's a great lesson, and you're absolutely right. It's amazing how years are always mixed up. We think things are so much longer than they were.
Did we come off the gold standard later than that? Is that what you're about to tell? Was it the 50s?
Yes. It was actually Nixon who's the one who took us off the gold standard.
Wow, okay.
Right. So he changed a whole bunch of stuff when he came along and took us off all of that with the gold standard. So it's very interesting how we get into all those things. All right, Bob, let's have a little bit of quiz, okay?
Okay.
Don't cheat.
Okay.
Okay?
On this one, I didn't. I tried to, but it didn't work out.
All right, so Bob, all the money in the world, how much money is there in the world?
$100 trillion. I have no idea.
Okay, as of March of last year, March 21, okay, there was nearly 2.1 trillion US dollars in circulation.
Okay, so US dollars.
Yeah, that include Federal Reserve notes, coins, and currency no longer even issued. If you're looking for all the physical money in the world and money deposited in savings and checking, it came to about $40 trillion.
I guess $100 trillion. I wasn't that far off.
You weren't too far off. I mean, what's an extra few trillion, right, when it comes to it? All right, Bob, let's talk about cryptocurrencies.
What?
Okay, cryptocurrencies. How much do you think is in cryptocurrency?
I mean,
I'm totally putting him on the spot, folks.
yeah, by the way, like, this would be a massively different answer about 9 months ago or even 3 months ago.
Absolutely.
I don't know. $1 trillion.
All right. So the total value of cryptocurrencies surpassed $2 trillion in August of last year. There has been a crash in May of this year we saw recently. Right now it's about
Just a little over $1 billion.
yeah, a little over
a little over $1 trillion. It was about $1 trillion, so it cut in half.
Yeah, 1.3 trillion now. We were up to 2 trillion, all right? Do you know what the most valuable currency is in the world and what its value is against the US dollar?
I have no idea. Like, at some point, I probably would have guessed maybe like the euro. but
Okay.
I don't know.
And I remember growing up, this was a huge thing. I grew up in Toronto, and I remember it was a huge thing to track where the dollar was before you'd go across, say, oh, it's a good weekend to go shopping in Buffalo or whatever.
Yeah.
The most valuable currency in the world is the Kuwaiti dinar, and one Kuwaiti dinar equals $3.33 is the last time we checked.
All right.
Okay.
I lived on the other side of the border, Chad. I grew up in a town where
So you'd come across and you'd
we
steal.
know when the Canadians were coming across because the value of the Canadian dollar was high, right? And seriously, like, the economy in Blaine, when the value of the Canadian dollar was low, you could feel it in the economy in Blaine. People bought less gas there. They bought less dairy there. We had 5 shoe stores in Blaine or something crazy because Canadians come across the border and buy shoes, but all of those things where the traffic around town would be less when that Canadian dollar was weak.
Yeah, it's interesting how you don't think about certain things like that unless you're on the border.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Top 26 billionaires. How much worth do you think they have? What do you think their net worth is?
The top 26 billionaires.
Top
I saw the
26
other day,
billionaires, according to Forbes.
I saw Bill Gates the other day was worth like $105 billion. So he's number 4. So let's say we average 50 billion a person for 26 of them, what does that make?
I don't know. You're the math guy.
50 billion times 2 would be 100 billion. Add another 0 on there would be a trillion. I don't know, 1.5 trillion.
Okay, the world's top 26 billionaires last
13
year.
trillion? What?
$13.1 trillion is their net worth. Isn't that amazing?
If he has 100 billion, that means 10 of them would have a trillion. All right, yeah.
Doing some math. Bob's over there doing some math on me.
That's
All right.
crazy.
Just some stats about money. Now let's dive into how money works Bob, have you ever heard the term M0, M1, M2, M3, or M4 in the world of money?
Not before we started doing this. I'd never even heard the terms broad and narrow money.
Right. And that was the next terms I was going to ask if you understood. This is how the banks and governments talk money. Okay. You got to recognize that some money is called narrow money. We'll cover what that is in a second. And some money is called broad money. Okay. Broad money is not as liquid when they're figuring out how much money is out there in the world, and how much narrow money is in circulation helps them set policies, help aid in managing and foreseeing changes for inflation, interest rates. That's how the Fed does stuff. So narrow money, Bob, is important because it's used to measure and analyze the money supply within any economy. Okay. Now, it's not just the United States who does this. Every country does their own thing here. Narrow money helps you understand how a country is performing economically, and it's vital to understand the difference between the broad and narrow. So narrow money, money you have. $50 in your wallet, that's as liquid as it gets.
Sure.
Okay? $500 in your checking account, pretty liquid. You could run to the bank or the ATM machine, put your card in, you could have your hands on it. Okay? Traveler's checks, they're liquid. You could walk in and cash them anywhere. Okay? They're not as liquid as that money sitting in your bank account. So the M0 refers to truly liquid money.
Like cash?
Cash, coins, anything you've got on you right now. Check your pockets. I think I have like $17 in my wallet, right? That's M0 level.
Can I admit something here while we're talking about money? I have a guilty conscience right now because this morning,
you stole from your wife's purse.
Well, no, hold
you?
on. Listen. Okay, so we used to go to the casino. My wife and I used to like casinos, and it was ridiculous. But anyway, before we had kids, and then we had kids. We haven't been to casino in like 6 years. I don't know how old our oldest is, but we took the kids recently to visit their aunt and uncle. They stayed the night there, and mom and dad went, and we went to casino, right? And so we stayed the night. And we walk in, and I have $400 in my pocket, and I lose $100 in 5 minutes. I mean, just gone like that fast. But my wife wins $800 in the same 5 minutes, right in the beginning. Well, over the rest of the night, Chad, I end up winning. Like, I don't remember the last time, if ever, I've won money at a casino. I walked out with $950 in my pocket. I walked in with $400, so I won like $550, and my wife won $600, which means, by the way, she lost $200 for the next like 4 hours that we were there, right, after winning $800 in the first 5 minutes. But anyway, so we won like $1,000 or whatever. And so I don't ever have cash. I don't ever have M0 in my pocket very often, right? I use an M1. I have a bank card. So I had this $850, I think I had left, sitting in my bathroom. And then we have a cleaners that come on Friday. And so 2 weeks ago, maybe 3, I don't know, I thought right before the cleaners were coming, I shouldn't leave this $850. It's just too tempting, right? I don't want anybody to get in trouble here. So I took it mindlessly and I hid it. And then this morning, Chad, I go into my bathroom to look where I'd had it for a while. And I'm like, money's not there.
Uh-oh.
I'm like, I run in, my wife's asleep, so I'm like, honey, hey. I'm like, I think the maid stole, like, I think the house cleaner stole my money. And I'm like, actually, maybe the kids took it. I'm like, no, actually, that's probably more likely. So I go in, I'm like, what do you guys do with my money? And I like accuse my boys of stealing the money. This is so ridiculous. And then I leave the house. I'm like, Carter, you better find that money. Because Chase had come over. He's like, oh, was it like a big roll of money, Dad? I'm like, that's exactly what it was. And so now I know you guys know where it's at. So then Carter's like, yeah, I think I might have put it. He's like walking around the house trying to figure out where it's at. Anyway, I leave all like, then I'm driving up here and like, somewhere in the back of my head, it's like, you dipshit, you put that money somewhere. Where'd you put it? And so then I had to call my wife in shame. I'm like, I'm sorry. I put the money somewhere. I think and she found it for me. But anyway, sorry. I had to get that off my.
Well, we're glad that story finished quicker than Ben's ghost story about his mochi going missing, Bob. So
yeah, it was actually me. I stole my own money.
Stole your own money. All right. So that M0 level is that money that we have or money readily available. So yes, your $850 in that situation, it was as liquid as could be. If you lost it, that's on you, right? The money you could just run to the bank and pull out right now. Traveler's checks, things like that, they're narrow. They're just not as those are going to be M1. So when an economy starts looking at how much money they have, M0 equals that liquid cash, Bob. M1 equals that liquid cash plus. So the level of M1 is M0 plus these traveler's checks and other things. Then we start to get into M2, which equals M0 plus M1 plus the things that the government will decide is M2, M3, and M4 as you keep growing. The M2, M3, and M4 monies are called broad money, Bob. Okay, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I don't know who comes up with the names for these things, but that's their name. They're the OECD. They sound a little OCD, right? 38 countries make up the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's been around since 1961. Have you ever heard of them before?
No.
No, of course not, right? They define broad money as banknotes, bank deposits not considered long terms, like with a maturity of up to 2 years, bank deposits redeemable at up to 3 months, and similar repurchase agreements, right? Money market funds, shares or units, and debt securities maturing within a period of up to 2 years. And then they'll go up to what they call M3 and M4. Every country gets to define it slightly different. Like all the money that's in the stock market, that's not liquid.
Right.
That's M4 money. It's there. It's money. It could be all sold and you could all take your money. We would have a major economic situation going on. Yet it is not that's M4 money. Okay. So understand that as the government is doing all of this stuff, you start to get into these, right? So let me recap. M0, physical currency present globally, including coins, notes, bills, resting in people's pockets. Also includes money in bank vaults and deposits in reserve banks. M1 now includes M0 plus traveler's checks, demand deposits, checkable deposits, negotiable orders and withdrawals. Okay? So it's assets that could easily be converted into cash. M2 now is M0 plus M1 plus mutual funds, saving deposits, money market securities, timed deposits. Okay? They're not as liquid as M1, saying you can't turn it into cash easily. They can be turned into cash though. M3 is now M0 plus M1 plus M2, and it equals all the things like money market funds, large certificates of deposit, things like that. And then M4 starts to include like the values in the stock market. Okay. Like I said, I went down a rabbit hole on this stuff. I just want people to understand that when we're talking money, there's narrow money, there's broad money. Bob, you have in your life narrow money and broad money.
Correct.
You just told us about the $850, right?
That's narrow.
That's not all the money that's sitting in your bank, I hope. Yet you have narrow. Yet you also have broad money. Do you have any long-term investments?
Yeah. I mean, I have money in the stock market, right? We got 401k. I would assume those are considered broad money.
Yep. You've got real estate value when it comes to it, right? You can't. That's not easily. You can't just say, "Well, I'm going to take my house is worth this and take it." You'd have to go through the process to sell it, to pull out the equity, to be able to get all of that, or however you're going to do it. We all have narrow and broad money happening in our world, and there are levels.
I think the levels in my head, it's a liquidity thing, right? Like you kept mentioning liquidity, right? And M0 is like literally in my hand. I could exchange it today. And then as we go up, it just gets a little bit harder to get to that money as you go up the M scale.
Yes. The thing to remember is M4 is M0 plus M1 plus M2 plus M3 plus whatever you put there. Folks, the government has their own. Every government out there will have their Canada, United States. They might be really close to each other, yet they might denote something that's an M2 or an M3 differently. Build your own system in your life. What do you have that's liquid? What do you have that's not as liquid? And what do you have that's very difficult to make liquid? It still impacts your net worth, yet it also limits what you might have available to you. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say they're house poor, right? They've got net worth out the wazoo possibly, but they don't have any money to actually spend because it's all tied up.
Ben talks about his buddy here in Whatcom County, the farmer that owns all this land up here, but he doesn't have cash on hand, right? He's just got all this land that's totally illiquid.
Correct. Okay, so we might be in that situation.
This is a time, I think, if you look right now what's happening in the stock market and just the economy, and you always hear people say, this is the best time to strike, right? Like you got to buy stocks when they're low and all this. Like you basically need liquid money today to be able to move in a market like this, right? And so you're always trying to balance, like when the money's sitting there at an M0 level, you're probably not making anything with that money. It's just in the bank, right? But when I have it at that level, I can strike and buy something where the price might be, COVID, when it broke, would have been the ultimate example of this, right? People that were sitting around then with cash when the markets crashed were able to come in. But if you had your money was sitting up at that M3 or M4 level, right, you couldn't necessarily go get your hands on that money right now to go buy a stock tomorrow when that stock tanked.
Correct, which is why they look at the value in the decisions being made based on those M0 and those M1 levels. How much liquidity does our country have at any moment? How much cash is out there to be played with for people to become buyers and help the economy? Or are people not buyers because there's very little M0, M1 level money? So, Bob, there's this organization. I almost think Dave should insert evil, maybe the March of the Empire, right?
They get a bad rap.
Right? Yeah, they get a horrible rap. The Fed, right? Simple quiz. Do you know what the Fed stands for?
Federal Reserve?
Okay, just making sure, right?
Yeah.
I Googled it the other day. I was like, wait a minute, Fed, but is it enough letters? That didn't make sense. Yeah, they call it the Fed. They wanted to save money and only use 3 letters. So I don't think a lot of people understand what's happening. They just hear people say, well, the Fed's raising rates. And I don't know if they understand what they're talking about. So, Bob, when the Fed meets to talk, okay, they raise the federal fund target rate. They don't raise interest rates. They don't raise mortgage rates that everyone's out there and saying, oh, the Fed raised the mortgage. No, they don't touch the mortgage rates, okay? Their goal is to just increase or decrease the cost of credit throughout the economy. That's what the federal fund target rate does. So when they raise the rate, as they just did, like you said, we don't know when these drop, but they just did at their last meeting in June here, right? They raised the rate. That means
one of the biggest rate raises, by the way, since in decades.
How long do you think? Look me in the eyes and answer that question.
50 years?
1994 was the last time they raised 75 points.
Okay.
That's what happened. They raised 75 points. And here's the thing, Bob. We're only at 1.75. I mean, they raised us 0.75 to 1.75. That's how low the rate was with the Fed, okay? By raising it, it means the banks will pay more. Think about this. It means the banks pay you more to borrow your money, which means that money sitting in the bank gets a higher interest rate, okay?
But it also costs somebody, it costs the person who wants to borrow it from the bank more to borrow it.
That's right. If the bank has to pay me more to borrow it, the bank's going to charge you more to borrow it, which is why you then see mortgage rates or credit card interest rates or those other rates will start to go up based upon the Fed making the change.
There's a correlation potentially, but it's not the cause of the rise. What's interesting is we hear all the time that cheap money, right? We've been hearing this for years because the Fed rate has essentially been at 0. It was at 0 or down right near 0 for a number of years. So it was this free cheap money, right? You went and borrowed money. The interest rates were so low on it that in most cases, for a lot of companies, it made sense to just go borrow the money because there was no cost to borrowing the money. Right?
Correct.
And what tends to happen in that environment, and I mean, there's other factors here too, the stimulus checks where the government was essentially creating a larger money supply. But what happens when people are borrowing cheap money and you have an injection of more money into the system is inflation.
Yes.
Which is what we're seeing now, right? And so the Fed will use these really the only monetary control they have is that federal funds rate. And so they basically say, we want to take money out of the economy by raising the cost of what it costs to borrow money.
Yes.
Right? they're slowing down the growth so that we can get inflation under control. Or that's what they're attempting to do by raising the federal funds rate.
Correct. We are close in age, right? I got a few years on you.
Yep.
We are close in age. You'll remember when we were younger, we put money in the bank.
Yeah.
Because you got 9 or 10% on your money.
Sure.
Meanwhile, mortgage rates were at 17%.
Yeah.
Right? So banks paid us more to borrow our money and then charged our parents more, of course, to have it, right? And what we know is, like you said, it correlates. The Fed raises what it's going to cost. The banks pay you more. Therefore, the people will charge you more, whether it's credit cards or banks or car people. I mean, how many years have we been looking at 0% interest on your car loan? It's going to go up because it's going to start costing them more to borrow the money. I was looking at a historic interest rate and mortgage rates for 30-year fixed mortgage rates, okay? I went back 1970s here, okay? Since 1970 to 2009, the mortgage rate never broke below 5%. It was 7.5% back in the early 70s. It went up to 16.5 average in the early 80s, came back down to 7, came down to almost 6, just under 6% in the early 2000s. And it wasn't until 2009 that the rate actually, or 2010, that the rate dropped under 5%.
And has stayed there.
And has stayed there for 10 years.
Basically last week.
Correct. And now everybody's, panicking and saying it's so high. It's not even close to high yet compared to what it has been. Bob, the Fed meets 8 times a year to look at where we're sitting with money. And again, I don't know when Dave's going to have this episode dropped for us. I'm going to let everybody know the next meeting, as of the time of this recording, is mid-July. And rumors are that the Fed will raise the rate again, okay? Which means the correlating effect. Your money in the bank will start paying you more. The money you start borrowing is going to cost you more.
Yeah. I mean, I think the 0.75 hike recently was a little bit unexpected. Like there was a previous hike where they thought that they were going to be able to get inflation a little bit under control. It didn't happen like they were thinking it would. And so they took a little bit more drastic step on this last one, but they're kind of putting it out there. And here's what, like the mortgage rates, for example, they're probably already moving on an expected 0.5% hike in the future,
Correct.
right? So the markets, the mortgage rates are essentially set by a market.
Yes.
And the market is already taking into account the fact that inflation is not being reined in by the last hike and that there's another expected hike. So a lot of times the mortgage rates will bounce in front of the Fed making a move.
Yep.
Right.
And then they might come down because if the Fed doesn't do what they anticipated, they'll react to it as well.
Yeah.
Right. So you might see rates going up now till July, and then depending what happens and how they predict it, you might see like a week or two where the rates kind of dip a little bit in there. I'm not an expert on this stuff. Clearly, we're learning about it. We're all learning with you, our audience, at the same time. There is a rumor, right? Market expectations and future markets are happening that are showing us that there's a chance, Bob, that by mid-23, so that's a year from when we're kind of recording,
right,
this Fed rate could be up near 4. It's 1.75, which means it's still going to more than double if that's what they need to do to get control of this inflation challenge that's happening.
Which is like kind of runaway at this point.
So, folks, be ready.
Gosh, I'm just sitting here. My wife and I are looking for an investment property right now.
Every day it costs you $1 more.
Every day. Like there was one that came across today. I'm like, honey, maybe this is it. Maybe we should start man.
Yeah, I saw some people posting, again, mortgage rates. We're not here to talk about that stuff yet. Mortgage rates are a great way that the general public sees what's happening with the rate changes, right? We're not thinking the banks ever pay us, and no one really looks at their credit card statement and says, wait, that changed how much they're charging me and all that stuff. Mortgage rates we all pay attention to, it seems.
They catch the headlines, right?
They sure as heck do. Someone just shared, though, great value that said, with the anticipated change of over 1% in the mortgage rate coming, and even if homes were to drop 10% in value, you'd still actually be paying more if you waited and bought it at the cheaper value of home because your mortgage rate will be higher.
Yeah, we don't. Interest rates are one of those things where it's not you don't naturally understand a 1% interest rate move, how much that actually costs on a 30-year mortgage. It's
correct. Just like you don't understand how much a 1% interest rate change impacts the money you have in the bank, right? You've been getting nothing on it for how many years? We've been getting 0% interest. You see like
No,
3
I get like
cents
7 cents. The bank drops every couple. They drop into my savings account an extra 7 cents for me. I'm like, what?
Don't touch the money. Leave it alone. Before you know it, now it's getting 1, 2, 3% on that money. And now what ends up happening is Ben's compound interest lessons that we've heard again and again. Maybe we actually start to make some money actually just using a bank. Okay. Now, Bob, the other side of this is that horrid term that everybody seems to fear, which is recession.
Yeah.
Do you know what a recession truly is?
So I did know this, you've actually come up with a couple definitions. So I am familiar with one of the definitions, which is essentially if we have 2 quarters in a row of negative GDP, we're technically in a recession, I believe is the definition. That
is the term from 1974 that Julius Shishkin came up with to define a recession.
It's kind of a rule of thumb, right?
Yep. It's not the true answer. It's just that's what it is. Now, Bob,
well, that is the true answer because that's what the layman out here has come to understand the recession to be.
Do you know what GDP means?
Gross domestic product. That would be like the total sum of all of the output of a country in a given year.
There you go. Okay, good. All right. So if it's negative for 2 quarters,
your
that's
economy's contracting and
right?
You're in a recession.
That's considered a recession. Okay. It's become common practice. And like you said, if you stop the man on the street and just said, what's the definition of a recession? They're probably giving you that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the National Bureau of Economic Research.
Another thing we had no idea existed, but here it is.
NRBR is their name, is recognized as the authority. And they define it as starting and ending dates of U.S. recessions. They say it's a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy lasting more than a few months, normally visible in real GDP, real income, employment, industrial production, and wholesale retail sales. So it's an overall arcing thing. It doesn't matter. They actually said the coronavirus created what they called a W-shaped recession, right? It fell 1 quarter, but it went back up, then it dropped again, and you can kind of see like that middle part of
so
it
would not have been a recession by Shishkin's definition of 2 consecutive, but there was a W-shaped recession.
Right? Quarter 1 went down, but quarter 2 went up, quarter 3 went down. They're not consecutive, yet it's still the National
Bureau.
Bureau
That's ever happened in history, like because this was such a massive shock to the economy. I just wonder, is a W-shaped recession a common thing?
I did not find too much research on a W-shaped recession, yet what we know is that we're probably heading into one. Obviously, we aren't the experts on it. That's just what everybody is telling us is coming, that a recession is coming. A recession doesn't mean panic, right? A recession just means declining GDP over 2 consecutive quarters. You know how you can help a recession stop? Spend money, right? And what do most people do when a recession happens?
They tighten the belt.
They tighten their belt and lock everything down, and all that's doing is adding to the recession by forcing us down even more. What'll end up happening? Someone will somehow stimulate the economy in one way or another that will then get us spending money again, which will drive the GDP up.
I would assume that NEBR, National Bureau of Economic Research, like I would have to imagine that some element of their decision to call a recession is consumer confidence, and the consumer confidence index, basically like if people are hearing recession everywhere and they're getting they're not very confident in the economy and now they feel like they need to start hoarding, like that could be a reason that we're driving towards a deeper recession potentially.
Yes. It'll force people down. So here's the impact on money throughout history. It's one of the most important parts of our history, leading to some of the biggest and most vital moments for many nations out there, right? The invention of currency has allowed people to trade goods and services without having to barter to find an appropriate price of barter. Paper currency allowed for international trade because it was lighter and able to be carried. I mean, can you imagine if you had to take all those coins with you?
You know, it's funny. I just read an article about where is this? Maybe off one of the coasts down in South America. There's like some big ship out there that's got, thousands of pounds of gold and silver bullion at the bottom of the ocean from the 1500s, because that's what they were doing. They were trying to bring all this money, right, in a boat. It was super heavy. And I mean, they used to run ships back and forth between the Americas and Europe with just coins in them, right?
Yes.
Like,
that's why piracy was such a thing. There was just the opportunity to take it. So paper currency allowed international trade because it was light and small in size. And now digital currency allows individuals the opportunity to be able to spend money in a way that's just extremely convenient. You don't have to carry it anymore at all, right? Since money was first invented, it's had an immense impact on how trade is done throughout the world and how we live. Not only have wars been fought over money, but some of the most important advancements we've made in human history would never have been possible without it. So, Bob, we've had a history lesson. We've had a little bit of a dive into understanding how money works. What did you learn that's going to help you and maybe our audience as we move forward?
That's a good question. I learned that I got to have liquid money. Like some element of it, right? Like I need to make sure that I have a diversified, like if the federal banking system is constantly monitoring how the money's dispersed out in the economy, I should probably be thinking about that for myself. Like which things, because if you think about, we go back to the wealth series, for example, most of your liquid money is not making you anything.
Correct.
Right? Especially today, and maybe over time that gets a little bit better because the rates go, the savings rates go higher, but that's the money that I can use to strike at opportunities, right? Whereas the money my broad money, that's out there in my house, for example, like I can't get to that money to use it for any kind of capitalizing on an opportunity. Like in right now, there's a couple stocks I'm looking at that I just keep kind of going into as they're bought. I mean, these are Fortune 50 companies, right? Like some of the top companies in the world that have pretty good discounts on their stock right now, but I can't get my money in my house out to go buy that stuff, right? So just having a good balance of liquid versus having my money invested in things that are, actually getting good returns on it. I don't know. That's the thing that kind of jumps out here to me.
That's a great lesson that everybody should take away from this. Have liquid. Don't have too much liquid.
Yeah.
Don't have too little liquid though.
Yeah,
right.
It's Ben's buckets of wealth, right? It's I got some in, I got to have money on hand for opportunities that come up. But then I've got, some of my money into real estate, some into stocks and bonds, some into some of these less liquid deals. Yeah. The reality is, look, with stocks today though, like, I mean, I could sell my stock and have it in my bank account like pretty fast.
Yes.
Right. My house is a totally different story. Like a lot of our net worth is locked up in our house. And in order to unlock that, it would be a real process.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we sat down with someone at the Fed or in the government who decides some of these things. I wouldn't be surprised if the way digital has changed things, if things like the stock market have moved down and become maybe an M2 level fund, because yes, we could all click a button right now.
Yeah.
And by the end of the day, crash the stock market and all have money in our accounts though.
Sure.
Right? Wouldn't make as much. For me, diving into this, learning a lot more about the Fed, right? And understanding what the Federal Reserve's actually doing and then how it impacts things, and understanding what the rate's even at right now and how they're at 1.75, yet mortgage rates are over 5, or, depending where you are, and gas prices over, okay. It'll be interesting to see now that I have a little bit of understanding as to what that's going to be as I can watch the Fed change rates.
The Fed is working hard to get money out of the supply. Like they need to retract the supply because there's so much money out there right now, probably at that, I mean, really at the M4 level, right? Yeah. There's so much money that like if there was just $100 in the world and there was only 5 things we could buy, right, of equal value, they'd all be worth $20.
Yep.
Right. And it would cost us $20 to buy them. But if there was $1,000 in the supply and there was 5 things to buy, they'd all cost us $200. That's essentially what's happening. We got all this extra money in with really a finite number of things to buy out there. Now, GDP would suggest that over time, there's more things to buy, right? We extract more resources out of the earth, and there's a bigger economy to buy things. But if your money's outpacing the GDP and the ability to have things to buy, then stuff gets really expensive. That's what's happening right now. And the Fed's total goal is to figure out how to make that slow down, right?
I think that, and I hope our audience stayed till the end of this episode, Bob, because I think that little analogy you just shared, perfect.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Fed's role.
Perfect on if there were 5 things and $100, they'd each be worth $20. If there's $1,000, though, they're now worth $200 each. That's what someone's selling them for. And that's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
There's just too much money out there, which is why inflation is doing what it's doing, and the Fed is doing everything it can to bring it back to a natural level. Don't hate them because they're the ones who get the...
Yeah, they're the ones saving us from paying $30 a gallon for gas.
It's like your parents, when you were young, you got mad at them for sending you to your room. Now you can look back and appreciate, I'm glad they kept me out of those situations. Folks, that's what we're here to teach you at Win, Make, Give. Season 3, we're going to be looking at people making an impact, people making a difference. And you know what? We really hope we are some of those people in your world. We're also going to be looking at how you can make more money, and we had to start with a lesson today. So hopefully that educated you on it. Join us in our Facebook group. That's Win, Make, Give. Let us know your thoughts on money. Let us know your takeaway from this episode and what you've learned about how money truly works. And then help us stay out of this recession by spending it. And folks, as always, do good